Hello and welcome to Dawnversations. I'm your host, Dawn, and this podcast is just a lighthearted, easygoing show where we talk all things soul, spirit, and self-discovery. I just want to learn and grow and elevate in the best way possible, and I want you to come with me. I'm looking forward to all these new people that I'm going to meet and possibly building a brand new soul tribe. If you are new here, welcome. I am so happy to have you. And if you are returning and have been following me, thank you so much. Welcome back. I appreciate you all. And I hope that you get so much out of this podcast. I just am so excited for what's to come. So if you're ready, here we go. Welcome to another episode of Dawnversations. Today we have Karen Laos. Hi, Karen.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time. I cannot wait to get your message out there because there are so many of us that need it. Maybe not all the time and maybe not today, but at some point in time, unfortunately, we need a little confidence boost.
Yes.
And so that's why you're here today. So thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
So was your confidence level always high, or how did you get to be in this position where you're helping people with that?
Sure. Well, I'm laughing because I was either one of two extremes, overconfident or under. And I'll share a story. When I was 6 years old, this is where it all started. My dad used to love going to flea markets, and he gave me a few dollars at one of them and said, "Go have fun, but never pay full price." And
You're 6.
Yeah, I'm going, okay. And of course, wanting to please my dad, I got to come back with the best deal. So I did confidently negotiate my first flea market purchase at that age. And my dad taught me a lot about asking for what you want. And he always used to say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And if you don't ask. And so I had this wonderful foundation around that and always believed that I was capable. Now, juxtapose that with growing up in a very traditional home. My mom, through example, taught me that my voice didn't matter unless it was validated by a man. And she did whatever my dad told her, pretty much. So that was a confusing, mixed message to grow up with. And what I've come to realize now with lots of therapy and personal growth work, that the confidence I had always connected to something that I could offer someone of value. So many of us have grown up in that society of what you produce is what your self-esteem is based upon. And that moment for me later in life, now talking about another element, but related to this power of, wow, could I be good enough just for who I am? I remember my now husband, at the time we were dating, I told him all the things I had done at work that day. He said,
Yeah.
He goes, "Honey, I love that you love your job and your work, but that is not why I love you. I love you because of who you are, regardless of what you do." And that was one of those powerful, pivotal moments of almost disbelief of, really? And it never occurred to me until that moment that I had been basing so much of my life off of what I could accomplish for people and in the world. And I've come to learn that, a lot of people have a similar story.
People pleasing.
Yeah, exactly. It's that whole, and I did grow up trying to get my dad's approval. He was a very, again, traditional male at the time, very much around not emotionally connected, didn't ask about my day. He was very much a lecturer, or, here's what you do to get this, kid, that kind of thing. And
Right.
he didn't really enter my world. And so I learned that, you get approval based on what you do. So I am going to do amazing things. And I have had an incredible career. And now I'm very grateful for the things that he taught me, but it's been really hard to reconcile those moments of doubt, because what I also learned from my mom is that you, as a woman, it's your job to accommodate everyone else first.
Yeah, that's what I found out really fascinating about what you just said about your mom, because sometimes we think it's everything that we say and not necessarily what we do that kids pick up on, but they watch.
Right.
They watch.
As an adult, what I find so fascinating looking back is that my mom was a powerhouse in the community. My dad wouldn't let her get a job, but she could volunteer all she wanted. And she was in charge of so many different things, president of the Little League. I mean, I was the last of 9 kids, so she was very involved in the kids' lives and sports and activities outside of the home. And so that further emphasized, oh, you get to have a voice when you are in a leadership position, but that is not in the house.
Mm.
So I don't know. There's so many still confusing parts that I probably won't ever understand, but I think we're all complex beings navigating all these things that we
Right,
learned as
right.
kids. And then we have to figure out on our own how to deal with it all.
So do you think you are now a blend of both your parents?
Yeah,
They're good
for
qualities?
sure. I
Yeah.
definitely have. I mean, my mom had such a zest for life. She was just so likable and fun. And I like to think that I've carried on that legacy and have a spirit that is very joyful and positive, regardless of challenges. She lost 2 children, which I didn't know either of my siblings, but one drowned at 18, and their first kid was 2 years old when she died. And I think, man, the incredible hardship that she faced, but for her, it was just her life. Like each of us have our own burdens to carry, and she she took it upon herself to create a whole grief ministry program at the church where I grew up. And she led that for years and years and years. And every Tuesday night, we knew mom was at grief ministry. So that was another
Mm.
leadership role that she had. And she was very much, and my dad, I would say too, was very much a survivor. You move on. But I love that, so many of us grew up with, you just chin up, pretend that everything's fine, put all those uncomfortable things under the carpet. But I love that my mom acknowledged the power of grieving, especially in her generation, because she had me at 40. So she was already 2 generations ahead of me, or
Right.
whatever, older than me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting too how, what knocks one person down and they can't seem to get back up. For another person, they've seen so many hard knocks that it's like, okay, just get back up,
Yeah.
I can do this. It's so interesting our tolerance level
Yeah.
for what we can handle.
Right.
And, do you turn to God? Do you turn to friends? What gets you through? Some people don't have a big social circle and they just have to get through on their own. And it's so interesting to me. But,
No, I agree.
um,
Well, and on the spiritual side, just thinking about that, that is a huge thing that got my mom through. I think that's important to acknowledge. And also, in a lot of recent hardships for me are related to my husband's kidney failure, which happened during COVID. And that has been one of the most challenging things in my entire life. But I'm grateful that my mom shared her faith with God in me and instilled that in me as well, because I feel like a lot of people ask me, how can you stay so positive with all of these hard things? And you can't control another person, can't hard enough to control myself, let alone
right.
spouse. But be watching someone go through such a hard thing and all the struggles, you've got to find whatever works for you. For me, it is my faith, and that again was taught to me by my mom through example. She never said, "Oh, you need to have faith." It's just
Right.
part of her life. Yeah.
Yeah, the loss of a child, I can't even fathom. I can't wrap my head around. So to think that she's gone through that, twice, that's awful. So when we talk about being validated and like social media, that whole idea, like what is it? Even I am guilty of it. You throw your podcast out there and you want it to get so many views, and if you feel like you're not getting enough attention, it can like start to affect your ego and your self-esteem, and you feel like maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Like, how do we overcome that self-doubt?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things that came to mind when you were talking is we have to be driven by a mission or a calling. I
Yeah.
personally believe that if we don't have the why, or as one of my new mentors, Harris III, says, finding your wow first. What is the wow and the awe and the wonder that you have about life that can really have the foundation that you need and for example, just to make this a little more tangible, for me, my mission is to eradicate self-doubt in 10 million women in the next 10 years. And I will tell you that focus has been the thing that keeps me going every day. On those days when I think, oh my gosh, that post was so good and nobody saw it. Or I can't believe I put in all this effort and then I didn't get anything from it. All these things that challenge us. And one of the things that we have to be grounded in is our belief system, whether that is a mission, a call. That's why I say too, you've got to be intentional about what you're doing in your life. And I will say, going back to when I first started in the work world, I read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen
Mm-hmm.
Covey. And there were so many things that have made an impact on me in that book. But one that I most remember is the guy who had climbed the corporate ladder and realized near the end of his life that he had climbed the wrong ladder, that he was going after accolades in business and winning the next deal when he also sadly realized he didn't even know his kids and he was estranged from his wife. And part of the lesson in that for me was making a deliberate choice every day of why I was in the job I was in. I was not going to be one of those people that woke up in 5 or 10 years and thought, what just happened with the last 10 years?
Right.
And as a result of that, it has caused me to be very intentional about the career choices that I have made and the actions that I take in general in my life. So that's a long answer to say, have a reason that you get up every day and that you go to work or have a business, whatever it is that you're doing. What is the meaning or the calling behind it?
That we have to be our biggest cheerleader, because that we are all we have. At the end of the day, you go to sleep with yourself
Right.
and you wake up with yourself, and that self-talk is just can be so detrimental if you let yourself go there and just start talking down about yourself and feeling you're not enough. That it can break everything.
Well, that's a good segue. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to make sure that I give some tangible exercises to your audience, because it's one thing to say, oh, just get over it.
Yeah, yeah, go smell a flower. It's all fine.
In the spirit of what you just said, I love that you said that because I use that sentence a lot. I'm not good enough. That's a message of doubt that many of us say. And what I'd recommend that you do, this is called the Broadway musical technique.
Oh, I love it.
You take that same message of doubt that you say over and over again and you sing it like a Broadway musical. So imagine if I'm saying, I'm not good enough. Suddenly, first of all, it sounds ridiculous. We're laughing. It changes up the whole physiology in our bodies. But from a scientific perspective, neuroscience wise, it changes up the neural pathways in our brain, which means that it takes the power away from that message. And that can be a practice that you could do anywhere. Well, maybe not in public or in a boardroom, but
In the bathroom, at
bathroom, in the
work.
car, wherever you find yourself with a moment of peace to yourself. That is a great way immediately to change things up, to change up that negative self-talk. Another one that I love is called the fear script. And this is where you write like a script. You start with putting on a piece of paper what your message of doubt is. So if we go back to I'm not good enough, or one that a lot of people that I deal with, because I work a lot in helping people present in meetings and such, is people don't want to hear what I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say if that was where you started, maybe if people don't care about what I have to say, that's your self-doubt talking. Well, then what would your highest version of yourself say? Like basically what would your authentic self say back to that? Of course people love to hear what I say, and even if they don't, it doesn't really matter because I know that I'm in alignment with my values and the ideas that I have. I know that they're good and they're worth being heard. And then fear could come back and say, well, but blah blah blah, and you can go back and forth. And what I find really interesting about it is that, first of all, when we narrate like that, and I am not a therapist, but I heard there's something called narrative therapy, and part of why this works so well is that it does take that power away, because it's almost like you separate yourself from the fear. And normally it
Okay.
feels like that doubt is in us. And I know technically it is, but when you separate it, you can go, that doesn't have to be the choice that I make. That's fear talking, or that's doubt talking. So when we can look at it almost as if it's a different part of ourselves or outside of ourselves, it can make it feel like, wow, I don't need to believe that. I actually have a higher self that has immediate answers to the fear questions or comments.
Right. Well, and that's like what you would say to your kid or a friend,
Right.
if they were like, I'm just not good enough, or I was at school today and I, was going to give a presentation, but I just don't think anybody cares. You would sit there and tell them those same things.
Right.
Of course, what you have to say matters. It's like, why can't we talk nice to ourselves?
That's
Terrible.
precisely it. That's a great analogy. Yeah, it's so true, because it's what would we say to someone else? And I went to a retreat recently. It was very, I still don't know if I think this exercise was a good one or not, but it was powerful. We had to write down all of our messages of doubt that we tell ourselves. And then we had to pair up with somebody and in front of everybody read it. Like basically, you would give me your list and I would read that to you.
Oh,
And the point was you would never say those words to someone else. And on one hand, it was powerful. On another hand, I felt like we never filled that up with the positive. Can we please do a part 2 of this exercise where we
yeah.
say the things that are positive over ourselves? Because
Or go set it on fire.
yes, that's right.
Oh,
So I remember
yikes.
thinking, oh, we need, because that's another thing that also, but it taught me something, that you also need to have the positive affirmations. And that's another thing I highly recommend, is that you pick a simple affirmation and put it everywhere in your house and in your notebook and in your phone, anywhere you look, and you say that multiple times a day, and in the mirror and all of that. And that's why I say you pick one at first. So for a few weeks, pick one. And I have an experiment where I did years ago. I remember thinking, do these things actually work? And I wanted to believe they did, but I wasn't sure. And I was totally sold, because I started saying, I am radiant. And as
Okay.
you can imagine, that is not a word in the English language that we use too often.
Right.
And 2 times, after a couple weeks of me saying this, I had 2 people specifically say, "Wow, you're radiant."
Really? That is so
It was in
cool.
a corporate environment. It was feedback I got from, after doing a training, and I thought, "Whoa, this is so wild." But I do think that our mind is a very powerful tool, and we need to train it to what we want to have happen.
Yeah, I love that. And do a question audit once in a while on some of the stuff that you're thinking,
Yes.
because just because we're thinking it doesn't mean it's a fact. That's the thing that's so mind-blowing. We just believe it because it's in there. We're just,
No.
okay, that's got to be true then. It came into my mind.
Well, and I love that we can imagine. When I started doing this, I'll give a very specific example. The whole, what would so and so do? But my boss at the time was, well, she's still the same person. She's a heavy thinker. If you any Myers Briggs fans listen,
Mhm.
it's definitely, she's a high T and I'm a high F. So I'm a high feeler. She's a high think. So she does everything based on logic. I sometimes had a hard time making decisions when I was working in my job because I was so focused on making the people happy and all of that. And she would be very black and white. But what she taught me and what I have come to do sometimes, not as much anymore, but certainly when I was in the role and probably a year after I left the job, I would ask myself, what would she do in this scenario? She would not be deliberating for an hour about this. It would be, what are the facts? And then what do we do about it? Now, I do think there's a happy medium, but it reminds me that sometimes we need to borrow the confidence from other people and go, yeah, what's another way to think about this
Yeah.
side of it?
I love that idea. That sounds so, because sometimes you do feed off the energy of other people or you admire them because
Mhm.
they do seem like they're so confident. And it's like, you can have that confidence too. It's not fake it to make it, but it's just, why can't you be confident like that too?
Right, right.
We're all entitled.
Exactly. And I do think that this is a good, since you brought it up about the fake it till you make it, I do think that I know there's a lot of talk about that the last few years compared to how it used to be viewed. But I do think that there's a lot of value in the idea of acting as if, because sometimes we don't know how to be that confident, but we have to act as if, or that fake it till you make it. But what I would say is a story from my life was when I was 18 years old, I sold Mary Kay cosmetics, and everybody used to say, "Are you going to get that pink Cadillac?" And I never got the Cadillac, but it wasn't really my goal. But the bigger point here is that I got something even better, and that is confidence. And what I learned is because I would go every Monday night, we had these sales and marketing meetings, and I was so fascinated by business. And what they taught us is you're never going to know every single detail about every product that we sell, but you better act like you do. At least show up in your posture and in your voice and in your presence with confidence. Because if you don't come across as confident, then nobody's going to want what you're selling.
Right.
Felt like that was such a good reminder. So they talked about the fake it till you make it concept, that sometimes you have to act as if before you really believe it. And I think it's really about action. It's less about faking it, but it's, I'm going to take action. And with a little bit of courage, then we can move forward. And I know there's a lot of talk about different, like 20 seconds of courage or whatever. I think you probably only need 6 or less seconds of courage. Could even be 1 second of courage. All it takes is deciding I'm going to ask, or I'm going to do this thing. And the more action you take, the more confident you automatically get. It's the
Right.
repetition. Yeah.
Well, and little baby steps, like even doing just that little 3 to 6 second thing, and you see the results of it and they're positive.
Right.
And it's like, oh, like dipping your toe in it, like, okay, I
Yep.
did that.
Yep.
Maybe I'll try and do something a little bit more bold the
Mhm.
next time.
Exactly. Exactly.
So the people that are out of the spotlight, do you think it's like they're shy, or do you think that they have no self-esteem? Like, what is that reason where people just are like, keep me on the sidelines? I don't think I want to be in there.
Boy, that's a loaded question, because it could be, on one hand, some people are naturally introverted and they have no
Hmm.
interest in being in the spotlight. And it's not even a confidence thing. It's just they're not interested. So I would say, looking at, for each person listening to this, going, what is at the root of your doubt? Or if you're behind the scenes, is it because you want to be? It goes back to what I was saying before about making an intentional choice, but don't make a choice out of fear. And this brings me back to another example where I was in a big performing group that traveled around the world for 4 years. In the staging process, where we learned all the choreography and the dances and the songs, all the parts had been selected. And this was 150 people, mind you. And there was this moment where the director was going through his notes and he stumbled and he goes, he realized he hadn't assigned a speaking part. And most of the stuff was songs and dances. But anyway, he said, "Who wants to read this?" I wanted to. I hesitated. And a girl next to me raised her hand, and she got to do that the entire year in every show. And we sang and performed every 3 days. And every time, maybe not every time, most of the times I would look at her going from backstage going, that could have been me. And I didn't have the confidence to go for it. And that is another reminder of that, couple of seconds of courage. Just go for it if you want to. Now, the difference to me and what your initial question about this was, is that I wanted to speak, but I held myself back. There are other people who have no interest in speaking.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out what for you is the thing that, I guess to me, I would look at it as, regardless of what your personality bent is, or maybe that's not the right word, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
Your personality is really asking yourself, what doubt do I have, and how can I counteract that with some of these exercises that we've talked about? And another one that came to mind that I really love is what I call 5 and 5. And that is asking 5 people in your life from different areas of your life. Not so, for example, not all your friends, but it does need to be people that you know and trust, to ask them for 5 positive qualities about you. And that exercise alone, first of all, it takes courage for some people to do that because it can feel a little weird. Could you tell me 5 things that are great about me? But you can position it as, I'm working on a personal growth project, or it could even be, I listened to this podcast with Dawn and Karen and I want to try this exercise. But what I find so powerful about it is that most likely you will notice themes from people, even if they're in different parts of your life. And I find it to be fascinating about how we are experienced by people around us, because that is our personal brand. There's so much talk about personal brand, but we all have one. The question is, does it align with who we are on the inside? A lot of times we think we're being this kind of person, and then we find out later, oh, that isn't exactly how I meant to come across.
Right.
But we won't know unless we ask. And by the way, this is also not a time to ask for constructive feedback. This is strictly, I want to know 5 positive qualities. And if you're not comfortable with 5, then ask for 3. But you can see some of these things, and you might see things that you didn't even realize were strengths, because we walk around with ourselves all the time,
Right.
And so that can be a wonderful to lift our self-esteem and help us hone in on that. And I'll give you a quick example, because I remember when I first did this, well, going back even years in high school, I remember people would tell me they felt comfortable around me. And I used to mediate a lot of conversations as a result. And that was a continual theme over my life, people have said. But I never thought of that as a strength. I always thought, oh, that's nice. But it wasn't until I started getting more into business, realizing that's actually a huge asset, because if people feel comfortable talking to me, they're going to probably want to do business with me. They're probably going to want to, share more things, so we can have this psychological safe environment, which, was never a term when I was growing up in business. But all of these things that, we talk so much about soft skills, and I think soft skills are actually very hard skills, because that's how we make most of our business decisions, is on emotion. Obviously, it has to be backed up by facts, but so much of life is about trust and credibility. And do we think this person is somebody we'd want to do business with? So there's so many components of this. And if we can be aware of our strengths, then all the better to know that. And then we can also share that with people about, here's what I do well. And then also being clear about, here's what I don't do well. Like, I'm very clear with people of, I am not your person if you need this thing. I can do this really well, but not this thing over here.
Yeah, and that to me shows confidence, that you're willing to own up to your weaknesses too. It's like, I'm really good in these areas, but I am not your gal if you need this, or this. That just shows that you know who you are and you know your capabilities, and that's definitely a strength to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had heard too along the way that sometimes if you put a picture of yourself as a child on your mirror, a mirror that you look at all the time in your bathroom or where you put your makeup on or whatever, and just think about how you would talk to that child.
I love that.
Yeah, I thought that was a really,
Yes.
because sometimes we don't want to do the mantras, or we just think it's not tangible stuff. And it's like, I don't have time for that. Well, you have time to take a picture and put it on your mirror.
Mhm.
And every day, look at that little kid and just say to them, you're smart. You're great. You're going to do great things. Just build yourself up that way.
Exactly. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's so good.
Yeah. Okay. So tell people how they can find you. I know you have your own podcast, and I definitely want you to promote that, because it sounds like what you're going to try and do in the future is more like kind of quick bullet points or really quick things that people can access, which is right up my alley because my attention span is like a flea on a hot rock. So, yeah, tell people about your
Yeah,
podcast.
sure. So my podcast is called Ignite Your Confidence, and it is for women typically over 40 in the corporate world who are in leadership roles. And frankly, it's for any, I mean, my tips are universal, and people love what I hear all the time is they love my practical tips. So I do lots of solo episodes with, here are the top 3 things you need to know about how to promote yourself, or here are the 5 things to know before you launch a business or whatever. And so people like that a lot. And I am, let's see, what's the other thing? Oh yeah. And I like to say I accidentally started a podcast, but I also kind of accidentally wrote a book. But my book is a guidebook for confident communication. And the whole thing is a roadmap for tips on how to present yourself, how to talk to anybody for anything, negotiating, all kinds of executive presence, how to use your voice mechanically. So a lot of good tips in there, and it's called Trust Your Own Voice.
Awesome. I love that. Are you going to write another book, do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be on asking how to ask for what you want, but
Ooh.
it's not immediate. I think the more I talk about it, the more eventually I'm going to have to, because I'm telling everybody, oh yeah, I'm writing this. But
That's
the
awesome.
way the first one happened, I would not recommend it to anybody. So
Well, some people have worse accidents than that. I mean, coming out of it with writing a book, I don't think is the worst scenario.
yeah,
So that's great.
that's true. Well, and what I would say too, that probably the easiest thing to access that you can read in 5 minutes is on my website, called 9 Words to Avoid and What to Say Instead.
Oh, okay. What's your website?
It is KarenLaos.com, and it's KarenLaos.com.
Awesome. Karen, thank you so much. I can't wait to listen to your podcast. I want to read your book. Like your message is so inspirational, but you're so positive, and it's just got a good vibe. So I definitely am going to find out more.
Thank you, Dawn. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I feel like we could talk all day together.
I know. Well, thank you so much, and I will be in touch.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.